Hey everyone, welcome back to the Conversations with Adrian podcast. Today I'm joined by Jaguar Heart. Jag, thank you so much for being with me.
Thanks, man. What's this, number 4 or 5 or something
I
like that?
think
I
it's
think we've done.
five.
We've done a few now.
I think it's five. I had
Yeah.
a little think about this morning before I jumped on. I'm pretty sure you and another interviewer, Dale Holmes, are around about four or five. You're around about the same. But I think you're in the lead at the moment with five, but I could be wrong. So I know how
Yeah, cool.
competitive you are, so I'll keep you there in
Yeah,
front.
always got to be number one, mate. There's nothing wrong with
Yeah, 100%.
nothing wrong
Hey,
with
what have
that.
you been up to lately? I was liking your new branding and a lot of things coming through your social feeds, which is great. Catch me up on where you've been.
Yeah, thanks, man. Man, that style's been ripped off by like 20 accounts already. Like I had it up. I had mates rip it off, and I was like, come on, man. Like at least have some etiquette around it and try to make it a little bit unique to you. But I guess it's like I'm the OG that did it. And I spent a bit of time like designing it. And I was like, okay, I've got to be a little bit more attention grabbing because I'm scaling at the moment. I want to go to the next level.
Hmm.
And so I had to completely revamp my image because I actually found that I got caught up in too much of like the warfare, the online warfare, speaking out against the feminist movement and then, the trans agenda and these social agendas that are at play. And I was like, I gotta, it was just creating too much stress for me. So I'm like, I need to eliminate, I need to clean it up, I need to see where I want to go with this and start to reshape things and shift things so I can scale into the next level. So I think last time we spoke, I was in the masculinity space,
Yeah.
which I'm still in at the moment. But now the next place I'm going to is couples and fixing relationships because there's partner one, right? So the man will have programming, the woman will have programming, then the relationship will have a program or multiple programs. And so I looked at it and it was kind of like this natural graduation to it because I look at the issues in society and there's three main issues. It's the attack on masculinity, there's the attack on the family, and there's attack on the church. So the spiritual foundation is one thing, and people can kind of go into that on themselves. But I'm a big stand for real masculinity and traditional masculinity, and now for the family unit to be restored as well. And that can only happen through restoration of relationship and restoration internally. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I've been going. That's what I've been doing. And that's why I did a poll recently on my stories and what do people want to see more of and what are they here for? And it was relationships and subconscious programming were the two things by a long shot. So
Mm.
that's going to be the next phase that I move into. So I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, interesting. When you talk about like the pushback you get from and getting caught up with that, what do you mean? Like you get into these sort of like DM wars with people about some of the opinions that you have or some of the things that you've been
Yeah.
expressing. Is that how it goes? Or
Yeah, that and like honestly, like if I get 100 negative comments, 99 of them will be from women, right?
right?
I talk about it, and people like I get labeled as a misogynist or a narcissist, which is the typical insult towards a man,
Mm.
because I provide facts and logic around argument, right? So one of the posts I did a little while ago was femininity in a woman is good, femininity in a man is not, and we're seeing that in society at the moment. And just like the hatred that got directed towards me, I'm like, you do realize that you're the representation of femininity that you say is the healing thing, and you're telling me to kill myself, telling me to go jump, telling me that I'm like, you're not
Oh,
even
wow.
displaying the right attributes for what's supposed to be a good thing. And
Sure.
so it was just stuff like that. And I found like there's this, because men are typically associated with domestic violence, right? When it comes to the issues in relationships, which is a physical aspect. But what gets largely missed is the manipulative gossip weaponization of character assassination, which is massive with women through emasculation. So
Mm.
there's work on both sides to be done. But I found I just got too caught up in that, and my father died in February. And so there was a lot
I'm
of
sorry
stuff
to hear.
around that I was working through, which was actually kind of spilling out into the world. So
Mm.
it was kind of an interesting thing to look back on now. And we can talk about my father dying and what I went through with that. That's been the biggest thing I've gone through in my life for sure.
Yeah, wow.
But I found that it was kind of spilling out in this way to use my intellect as a way to dominate in a way. But also there was this, one of the things that I posted about was the biggest abusers and murderers of children are women.
Yeah.
They are. The statistics don't lie. And that's on childwelfare.org that child abuse is like by a large percentage, perpetrated by women.
Yeah.
But they don't want to hear stuff like that, you know? So when I talk about stuff like that, you get the mob going at you because they want it to be men. And then you hear women will blame the only reason women are toxic is because of men, you know? And it's like, you still get to make a choice as to what you do with your life. So I was getting caught up in that too much. And it was too much hatred directed towards me. I was losing followers as opposed to gaining them. And I was just like, oh, this isn't really that good. So I've just decided to strip back, new image, fresh approach, move into the healing space, which is what I'm here for, rather than the political space, which is, you know, we both do it. It's important, but it's not my main grind. So I just had to kind of go back to that.
Look, I think the last couple of years really have kind of had this major segregation between, if you've got an opinion, then you're really like shunned and you know, publicly like humiliated and shamed about your perspective on things. You know, I think that but there's always been this kind of divide between masculine and feminine, or that patriarchy of the male world. You know, it's a man's world and all that kind of stuff. And I like the way that you're breaking it down and trying to be sort of in the man's corner, but also helping the female understand what a masculine representation is, because I think that whole dynamic has been skewed quite a bit. But back to the comment that you made about women being a perpetrator of that, you know, domestic violence and all that kind of stuff equally, or in some cases more than men. On an emotional level, I had a similar conversation with someone about a post that I did, and it was the same thing about abusive, and one of the things that come up was pedophilia, and it was like it was a throwaway comment to say, you know, what about all these men that are just raping kids and all that kind of stuff, and that was one of the things that I come back with. It's like, well, the stats are actually quite alarming in that. I think what I read was that out of 100 cases of pedophilia, there would be 80 out of 80, 40% or 50% of 80 would be the mother or the father. And then there's 20%, 50-50, something like that. Yeah, it would be a combination of both parents or someone that they knew. So there was an uncle or whatever. So yeah, like a lot of those facts kind of get pushed to the side, and yeah, it's the same with like male suicide and all that kind of stuff. People don't realize just how many men are killing themselves on a daily basis. And then we talk about domestic violence like it's, you know, this thing that's killing all women, but you don't really speak about men that are removing themselves from the planet because of, you know, various reasons and all that kind of stuff. I'm interested to hear though, with your perspective on, because you kind of have this stance about this is masculinity and this is the way a man should carry himself. You know, I like the values that you're bringing through, but do you feel that you had a need, or you felt a need to defend your stance because that's the persona that you, I guess, you know, portrayed in an online space? Were you getting on the defensive, like I need to prove myself right? Or is that how it went with you?
Yeah, probably a little bit of proving myself right, but it was more about bringing awareness to ignorance of people, you know, because I mean, I've had women online go like, here are the statistics, and a woman would say like, oh yeah, go back to you and your circle jerk of followers. I'm like, it's literally a statistic from the US government, and you're not willing to look at it. And so there is a satisfaction in proving someone wrong and being right. So that's a bit of an egotistical level. And yeah, 100%, that was part of it. But it's also like, I don't really suffer fools. You know, I don't really appreciate it. And men are portrayed as these stupid, bumbling idiots. And I'm the antithesis to that. I'm very articulate. I choose my words very carefully. And I'm very well researched about what I talk about. And that presents in the way that I speak, the way that I write, and my ability to accumulate and research and get facts to the contrary of the public opinion, which is based on feeling. So now, like, a lot of our social standing is conflating opinions and facts with feelings. And feelings are now the main thing that we need to go on. And we see this a lot with, you know, the female side saying, oh, they want a man that feels so deeply, you know, that's vulnerable. I'm like, then you want a girlfriend. You want a girlfriend. That's basically it. Like, a man is, firstly, our nervous systems are twice as dense as a woman. So we're going to be less empathic anyway. And the reason for that is because we need to hunt and kill and fight and do things like that. And so when we're in that space, my defensiveness, it doesn't really necessarily come in from a defensive place of me being triggered. Rather, it's more of like, I mean, if you go through all my comments, there's not one insult that I ever throw at someone, whereas insults get thrown at me. So if it was defensive, I'd be more likely to go towards insult, but I never go towards insult because I don't get triggered like that. But rather it's to say, I'll defend a point when it is statistical and fact-based and evidentiary in its foundation, as opposed to me just wanting it to be some way. Like, you know, one notion is that like women can do everything men can do. You know, like they think they can be warriors or they think they could beat men up. It's like that's just delusional, that stuff, you know? And so I am a real stand for masculinity, you know, because I stand as a man and I like being a man. And I think masculinity is important. The world would shut down overnight without men. The infrastructure of the world was built by men, and women live in the world built by men, and they want to destroy it and smash it and think that they could do a better job, but they can't even hold their own in an argument. They can't even like sit back and go, I shouldn't say all of them, but many of the interactions I've had, because I've had a lot of good interactions with women, they will say, hey, look, this is really triggering. Can you explain it to me? And I will. And I'll always be very fair and treat someone with respect, unless they tell me to kill myself or something like that, which is not common, but it's happened. And so when I look at it from that perspective, I really take the stance of saying, like, I'm more researched than you. So in this moment, I'm smarter than you, I'm more intelligent than you, and I'm calmer than you, and I'm able to hold my own. So to smash the patriarchy, which the patriarchy is really like a tiny substrate of men, like 0.00001% of men. Our society is actually more geared more towards a matriarchy. Like you look at divorce rates, kids getting taken. You know, a woman can get alimony in the States for the rest of her life. A woman can say he raped me. The guy will get arrested without really an overwhelming amount of evidence. But then if it's proven to be false, nothing happens to her. My belief is she should go to jail for the same amount of time that he would have if she publicly smears his name. But if we say, oh, a woman raped me, cops would just laugh at us. Yeah. You know, it's like, so there's a lot of things like that. There's a lot of elements that go conveniently. If you got hit by
a woman or something like that, it would be a similar thing. They set you to man up and get over it.
I worked with a guy who had a vase smashed over his head. And I said, that's domestic violence. He called the police and they laughed at him in America, at him about it and said, oh, just deal with it. She's just been crazy. Now imagine if you or I did that, we'd be in prison. You know, so there's a lot of double standards that are very, very, very conveniently ignored and overlooked. And a big aspect of that is the goddess culture. You know, the goddess culture that like the boss babe, all that sort of stuff. You know, I know women that have gone into these groups and they tell them to get divorced, to leave their husband, he doesn't honor you, doesn't do this. It's like, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you're a victim, everyone's going to look like a perpetrator. And then misery loves company. And, you know, the feminine, a lot of the time, don't have the ability to think long term. So this is first order consequence and second order consequence type of thinking, where it's like, it might be like, you know, I want to eat chocolate cake, but I know that I'll put on weight if I eat it all the time, and I want to get fit and I want to put muscle on. So I'm not going to do that. I'll have it once a week. So that's where we start to think longer term in 3, 6, 12 months. And I've seen this with women. I've seen this with women I've been with, where they literally can't think, I wonder how this will affect Jag or my partner or my kids or my friends or whoever it is or myself, and instead make a knee-jerk reaction because they can't think past their own feelings in that moment, which is first order consequence and inability to think past what's called a hedonic paradigm, which is purely pleasure-based, which is I'm just going to honor whatever I feel in the moment, and the world can burn around me while I do that. And that's a really unhealthy way to work and to live.
What just come to mind was that whole honor me in my chaotic space, that sort of notion of the feminine can just go on this wild rant and we have to sort of honor and make space for her feminine chaos, you know, those sorts of phrases and wording, you know, like this sort of devoid of any responsibility or emotional recourse or anything like that. So yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, and I mean, I did a post around that. I said, don't, you're under no obligation to put up with abuse and manipulation under the guise of feminine testing. And that went viral. You know, I had people messaging me. I had women making videos about it going, oh, women do it unconsciously, like justifying the whole thing. Right.
Sure.
And it's like, yeah, a woman's going to test you, but she's going to test you in a way to make sure that you can say no to her, not like deal with this chaos, which just ends up becoming trauma bonding for the man. And then the man starts to freeze going, I don't know what I have to do here. And you got to get to a point where you just go like, no, I'm not putting up with this anymore. I saw a post, and I don't know if I've said it in another podcast with you, but it said, test him 1,000 times, then test him 1,000 times more. And this was on a polarity account, right? And I was like, that's once a day for 6 years. I said, if you tested me once oh mate, I said, if you tested me once a day for 6 days or 6 weeks, you'd be out of my life because you're a pain in the ass. You know, like you're a fucking pain in the ass if you're doing that to your man. And that's manipulation.
It's manipulation,
it's
that's right.
And it's emasculation. And if you think he should put up with that, think about you having to put up with it from a man. Like, no thanks. No, there's no chance. And I tell men, if that's happening, leave. I wouldn't put up with it, and I wouldn't expect men to put up with it.
Yeah, there has to be a tolerance on both sides, but I think, you know, there's this. I get lost in a lot of the masculine, feminine, divine, masculine, divine, feminine, like all of that wording and all of that kind of sort of that flowy type of linguistics around it all. I really get lost in it all, and I think the practicality of it, that playing out within a relationship, the dynamic has to be met with a level of self-awareness and maturity that is able to deal with something that's right in front of you in a combination with, like you were mentioning before, a masculine, or the male will kind of look at it as a linear thing, and it'd be more sort of a timeline. It'd be more responsive to and more calculated. It'd be more it'd be less emotion based, and it'd be more logical based. And so there's a blend of that between the two, which is why the masculine and feminine combine so beautifully well when they work well together.
Yeah.
Whereas it seems to be of this is my divine space, and you just got to honor all of it. And then the moment that you do start to be more firm in your stance or views or whatever, it's like, oh, that's toxic. And you're what would you say, a misogynist? I got called a misogynist not too long ago, actually. So
welcome to the club, mate.
it's a good space.
Welcome to the club.
I wanted to ask you, when you talk about masculine and feminine energy within the male, so the one thing that I like about you, and I've been in some of your trainings, and I've also watched you for a few years now, so I like the fact that I watch you look at people's, I guess, prognosis of what I'm not sure if that's the right word, but they're sort of saying to you, this is what's happening in my life. And then I watch you look for patterns and body language and wording and languaging around, the things, how they describe and how they feel, and you look at their bodies and all that kind of stuff. So it impresses me that you can feel on a level that is like through a screen most of the time, where you can sense that this person's heading in this direction or another, and this could be the reasons for a particular outcome in their life. So would you say that is intuitive, or would you say that is a feminine essence or a feminine part of you that you're using in that component, or the way that you do that?
So it's a good question, right? And I think it's like, I don't necessarily think it's like masculine or feminine relative to it. It's just a gift I've been given. I can just see it, right? So I don't bring any emotion into it. So I guess that would say it's not very feminine. I just read the score of what it is. And there are patterns. So patterns you would say that patterns are like a code. Code is very analytical. So if anything, I'd say it's probably more masculine. And if I look at it, because feelings are like down the end of the chain. Feelings are not the first thing that happen. It's like people think that feelings come before thoughts, and they don't. And it's in pop psychology that it does, and I'm not a fan of that. I just say, well, look, have you been heartbroken before? Okay, yeah. I'm like, cool. When you weren't thinking about the person, you weren't upset. You weren't just walking down the street going, what's going on? Why am I like all of a sudden crying about this? It's like, no, it doesn't really work like that. And so when I look at people, And also I've done it thousands of times, like thousands of people, I don't know, be more than 10,000 hours now for sure. And just listening. And so I have the ability, listening is really something that I can do at a deep level because I listen to what's not being said, because everyone believes their thoughts. They believe them. They think that they're real, and they're real in an aspect of they're showing up, but they're not true a lot of the time. And so what I listen to is what people say and then what's underneath that, because most words are just a defense mechanism. And so with that, I'd say there's a bit of intuition with it, but there's also just, time on the field, so to speak. It's like, I train jiu-jitsu now, and when I roll, like I could roll blindfold and tap someone out, So is that intuition, or is that me just understanding the reaction times and things like that, which have been developed over a long period of time? It's probably more the reaction time rather than intuition, And I was with my coach training the other day, and I got him in what's called a reverse triangle, but it was as he was sweeping me. And he's like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And he's like number 2 black belt in the world for his age, not for his age, for his division. And I was like, yeah, I just felt it. I just knew that was there. So from time doing jiu-jitsu, which is like 9 years now, that I could just pick when that was, feel it, intuit it, whatever. I don't really know. But intuition is more, I think, something that's sort of in the moment. But as you practice something long enough, I guess you kind of develop a mastery to it. And now it's like when I'm working with someone, I pretty much hit it 100% of the time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective on things. I certainly, when I hear you say it, I hear a lot of that, what you could call a masculine perspective of things. It's very analytical. It's very repetition based, and I'm just mastering a skill as such, But I think that there's certainly an element that there is a talent that you have that's obvious within you, but at the same time, it definitely is something that is not only a skill that you've honed, but it's also something that is other than a skill that you've tapped into. So I think that side of it, I don't know whether you want to call it intuition, or whether you want to call it flow, or whether you want to call it the spirit, or whether you want to call it God, or whether you want to call it your feminine essence, which is more of that kind of intuitive and speaking into feelings and thoughts and vibrations and all those sorts of things. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm only really just going on my observation of you and interpreting certain things that have happened within my life. I think that there's a certain dynamic at play at the moment where, when you spoke to before about a man being very in his masculinity and decision based and focused and all those sorts of things, but also has to be a feeling person, and also has to understand and intuit situations and things like that, which is, it's a lot to ask of many men in this time and place that we have. It's not something that we've had to do historically. So when you get pushback from that, and when you reflect on your own life, like, where do you find that there is a yin and a yang, or a balance of both masculine and feminine energy, where you have to be less abrasive or less forceful or less linear and less decision making and kind of more flowy and bendy and flexible with how you're thinking and feeling and responding to a certain situation? Because obviously, like, you're going into couples relationships, there's a dynamic at play here that needs to be interpreted both ways, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of information that has to be processed.
The couples thing is very dynamic, and the process I work through is that it's very, very, very alive when I work with it. So the thing is, I get asked this all the time. They're like, well, what's your feminine side? I'm like, my woman. That's just what I say about it, because I'm not overly emotional. My life is pretty much run. I would say men, what they need to get, and I don't really know where the whole feelings of feminine thing came from. It's just human. I was having a chat with someone the other day, and she said, oh, what do you think about giving? If I give something to a man, isn't that's the masculine responsibility? I'm like, or you're just doing something nice.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, why the fuck does everything have to be masculine or feminine? Like, I heard in one of David Data's books, like, he's talking about getting ice cream in New York, and it's like, oh, getting the ice cream is masculine, then eating it's feminine in New York is. I'm just like, dude, this is just getting ridiculous. Like, I strip things back to like the sum of their parts, and I look at it and I go, I don't know, why are feelings feminine? Who said that? You know, they're just feelings. They're just part of being a human being.
I agree.
Otherwise, if it was typically masculine or feminine, only females would feel and men wouldn't feel anything. You know, and so that's the kind of the way I see it. I've kind of looked at this for a while, and I'm still waiting for someone to prove it to me that men have feminine energy. I think we can act effeminate, but the whole feminine energy thing, I actually have moved more towards that it's potentially a made up construct to make men more subservient to women and make them weaker, right? Like you look at, and I've seen this, if you look at a man that honors his feelings all the time, you flex that muscle, you become more emotional, you become more unstable, you become more erratic, you become more needy, you become easier to control. If you're controlled by your feelings, you look at any top sports coach in the world, any top performance coach, they will tell every single player that is an absolute champion, that's the top of their game, get rid of your feelings, don't listen to them. And so they don't guide you in a very good place a lot of the time. But society has pushed men into being more feeling because it's like, oh, I love you, brother, you know, like that. And there's a time and a place for that. But masculine love is different to feminine love. Masculine love is about discipline and structure, but the way it's delivered. Feminine love is around nurturing and romance. And we've conflated love with that. And so based on feminist ideals, of course, they'd want men to be more feminine, because then they're easier to control, right? A feminine man is more easily scared, which means he's going to run away from things. You know, you see, like, I've seen videos of women get robbed on the side of the road and the dude takes off, you know, because he's honoring his feelings. He's scared rather than stepping forward going, no, I'm not going to do this. So my whole thing with it is to go become good at being a man. Just become good at being a man. Fuck trying to be like a woman or honoring your feminine principle or you're in a goddess or whatever bullshit is out there trying to convince men that they need to dance around in dresses and rub themselves in coconut oil and go to ecstatic dance. If that's your thing, fill your boots, right? But we're looking at that. If we look at that from the concept of inversion, look at what they're doing to kids now with the trans agenda. Little boys are little girls are little boys, or werewolves or cats, or, you know, packets of peanuts, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But that's the way that it's going. You get men to think they're the opposite to what they are. Then you look at women in the feminist movement. They want to dominate and control men the same way that they say they've been dominated and controlled, and then take on masculine attributes, which leaves them bitter, lonely, angry, and competitive. And one of the most unattractive things for me is a disagreeable woman. I can't be bothered competing with my woman. I don't want that. I compete enough in the world. I don't want a disagreeable woman, and feminism makes women disagreeable because that's the trait of someone with usually a high amount of testosterone. Like, I'm so fucking disagreeable, right? Like, I'm one of the most disagreeable people I've met, but only on the things I know a lot about. But I won't just back down because someone thinks that I should back down and call me toxic or misogynist, whatever. But I'm like, just overcome your boy psychology, learn what it takes to be a man. And then if you want to go dancing in a dress and stuff like that, fill your boots. But that's not going to define who you are as a man. Just because if you cry once or twice, like, no one's saying don't feel, don't cry. I cried a lot when my dad died. It took a few months to come through, but it happens. And that was a grieving process for me that I had to go through. But I wasn't sitting there saying, okay, well, what I need to do is I need to create structure so my feminine principle can come through and blah, blah, whatever. Because I know my fucking dad died. That's what happened. And then the emotions that came through on the other side of it were what needed to happen to release certain things that I hadn't let go of due to his death. And that's it. And I think labeling everything, it's like labeling everything as masculine and feminine is the same way as the ridiculous industry of pop psychology labels everything as like everyone's a narcissist these days. Everyone's ex is a narcissist, you know, every man is a misogynist unless they bow to a woman, you know, it's like, just label everything, you know, and it's when we break it apart, it's the labels don't matter.
Yeah, I think you're right. The more I think about it, it's this whole sort of masculine and feminine energy. Just why a lot of the languaging I get lost in, and it infuriates me when I read certain posts or listen to certain people about that sort of using that talk. It really loses me, and I get frustrated because honestly, I feel like a stupid idiot. I don't understand it, so I feel like I don't know why I don't understand it, but it's just all this languaging around it. And I just feel like, man, I'm somewhat intelligent. I feel like I can understand most things, but I just don't get a lot of the interpretation of how that flows. But I like the way you think in terms of we're just human beings and we feel and think and act in a certain way. And there's a way that a man would probably react and think and feel that is more of a manly way to do that. And then there's more of a feminine way that they would react to think thoughts and feelings and emotions and all those things playing out. So I think if you just break that down to its simplicity, then yeah, there would be an appreciation for the way that you would handle things versus the way that your woman would in that same scenario. But that's why we complement each other. Like doesn't need to be a separation saying you're worse than or you're better than because this is the way you react to certain situations or how you think or what your processing is. It's just that you're a man and she's a woman, and that's the way that you deal with that process in the meantime.
Simple. Yeah, it's pretty simple.
How do you, when you go through emotional things though, at what point do you say to yourself or to someone you're working with that you're just not allowing yourself to feel emotions? You know, some of the things that I get in my coaching is that, look, he doesn't allow himself to feel anything. I can't connect with him. I have this blockage where, you know, I know he's had some problems growing up and there's a few things and he is just devoid of any emotion whatsoever. So that connection is lost between a couple. And so therefore they're at a loss as to what do I do with this guy that I think I love, or I say that I love, and I just don't know what is going to happen in this dynamic because I can't bridge this gap. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And she wants him to be more feeling, which means she wants him to be more like her.
Well, is that how you interpret it, or is it
100%? Yeah,
is he not able to feel emotions or not able to interpret or process it, or does he internalize it and squash it down? Like, to what point do you say there is some aspect of that particular person being a man that he doesn't allow himself to feel?
Yeah. So, and it's a good question, right? So there's a few things I'll take through with that, right? One thing is she's got the problem with him not feeling, right? To use your example. So the first thing he would need to do is go find men. I guarantee you that if he saw a child get hit by a car or something, he'd feel something. The thing is, women think that we don't feel, and it spills out in rage and anger and all that. That's when we're too emotional. That's when we're too emotional. Someone that doesn't feel doesn't have a reaction. So it's been conflated into almost like this paradoxical sense. It's like you haven't dealt with your emotions, but you're getting angry. It's like, well, hang on, I'm kind of dealing with it at the moment. And so what we have to look at is, why is that a problem for her? Right? Because women want men to be more like women so they feel safe, but then they don't respect them. So it depends on the severity of the man. So I'd have to look at what condition the man is in as well. But go and do some hard stuff. Go to jiu-jitsu, go to boxing, go lift some heavy weights, find some brothers, find a men's group, and be careful of the men's group too, because there's the biggest one at the moment. And I won't say who it is or who mentioned it to me because I didn't hear it directly, but I trust this dude's like a brother to me, that one of the biggest in Australia is allowing trans men. Is that the woman that converts, whatever, the women that converts to men into the men's group? And he messaged me, he said, hey, would you let a trans man or whatever into the group? I was like, no way. There's no way that I would, because it's not a man. And I don't care what way that person looks at it. That person should be in therapy. And there's no way that I would compromise the container of my men by letting in someone that's not a man. And I don't give a shit what people label themselves. You're an adult, you can do what you want, but my rules are no, right? So we have to look at the condition of the man. And so once he would start to open up to brothers, it's not healthy for us to take everything to our women. It's not. Like I say this again and again and again and again. If we become a dumping ground for her, she becomes a therapist or a mother, and that becomes unattractive to her. And I say this with respect, don't listen to what a woman says she wants from you, because they change their mind a lot. Women think horizontally, men think vertically. So we get problems and we go, cool, problem 1. Problem 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'll go deal with 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. We think vertically. Women will have problem 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from being on the run from the law because there's an arrest warrant out for them to making dinner, and they won't be able to prioritize which one should come first because they're more emotion driven. So, and I've seen this time and time and time again. And so what we have to look at is the man needs to learn to deal with his stuff. If he's frozen or shut down, move into a space where he can do that with other men. That's what we're supposed to do. But the problem is now is that a lot of men's groups are becoming more like women's groups where they're just sitting around clucking about their problems and not actually dealing with anything, not making any change. You know, I had this with, you know, my partner, her ex-husband would go to a men's group and then I'll be like, don't worry, man, she'll come back. It's just a phase she's going through, and she was never going back. And so that was bad advice. And so if the woman wants him to feel more, why? Because she wants him to be like her. And she wants a girlfriend, and girlfriends feel safe, right? That means I would say I'd be looking more at her and be like, what's your father wound? Because that will be the origin point of her wanting to make him feel more. Now, there are times where it's important to have to process your emotions. I had that with my dad. And so just so everyone doesn't think that I'm this stoic robot that doesn't feel. And stoicism gets a bad rap, right? Because people think it's about not feeling when it's not. It's about the ability to handle large emotions and have a high capacity for resiliency during difficult times and it not be taken out on people unconsciously. That's what stoicism is. It's handle your shit, basically, in a short sentence. So when I was going through that with my dad, when he died, I had a commitment to myself of training jiu-jitsu 5 days a week and doing ice baths every day for, 120 days. And I fulfilled on my commitment. I still showed up to all my sessions. I didn't cancel anything. And then in my own time, I didn't really feel much when it happened. And so over time, I started to have some health issues come up. And this is on the extreme end of it. And so I wasn't sleeping properly. I was getting some dizziness, some pins and needles in my head, but I'd been under some chronic stress for about a year. So it wasn't necessarily the death of my father. It was through other external situations that were going on in my life. And my father just compounded into it. And so then I'm like, all right, I need to figure this out. Stuff's going on. And I started to do diaphragmatic breath work, not hard, not powerful, nothing like that, but just resetting my diaphragm because I could feel my body was closed off a little bit. And I was actually frozen. That's the thing. There's a difference between a woman saying, oh, man, shut down, he doesn't feel, and he's not doing what she wants, versus you getting sick. You'll get sick when you're shut down. So if the man's just like maybe emotionally not very intelligent, that's very different to someone that can't feel. And it's just been labeled as that, right? So what I would do is I saw this, you might have seen it on my stories. There was a guy that won American Idol this year called Ian Tongi, and he sang a song in the auditions, and I would invite everyone to go watch it. And he sang a song which was by James Blunt called Monsters, which was about the death of his father, or as the impending death. And so I would sit there in the morning and I would listen to it and I'd write out all the good memories that I could remember about my father. And I would cry about it. I'd let it go. And then after about 5 days, it was done. And then what went with that was any resentment, any anger, any hostility I was holding on towards him, and all the good stuff I remember about him started to come through really quickly. And I realized how much of an amazing father he was. And that took me 5 days. It wasn't 5 years. It wasn't endless amounts of crying. Like it was 45 minutes to maybe an hour, 3 times, and the other times for about 20 minutes. And that was it. And that's how you deal with things from the deep level, because I allowed myself to feel it. I could feel my heart like squeezing like a sponge. And then I remember the last bit that came up. I was writing out a memory when he got out of a heart operation, and he gave me some cherry ripes when I was a kid and how happy I was to see him. And those tears came up, and I remember I felt it. I was like, that's the last one. And I knew it. I was like, I'm good now, because I was only remembering the good, and I can't really remember any of the bad anymore. And one of the things that I always get asked is like, how do you know you've healed? And I say, you forget. Yeah. Like healing, like you just forget. You don't think about it anymore. So it's like you become present to what you've moved through. So, and that's like, Jordan Peterson says it the best, that you never really become a man until your father dies. And I get that now, right? Like I got it at an intellectual level, but now I get it from an intelligence level, which is the wisdom of the body, because there's a subconscious security that when your father's there, right? And when he goes, doesn't even matter. Like I was stronger than my dad and whatever like that. But there is a masculine nurturance that comes from having your father around. And when he's gone, you're on your own. And there's a gap in your life that is there that will never be filled. It just never will be. So it's important to be able to go into those in an intelligent and healthy way. And it shouldn't be at the behest or the demand of someone else. Because if she really loved him, she'd love him for who he is, not for who she wants him to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can only talk about so many things in the context or within the dynamics of a particular relationship without knowing
Yeah.
all the bits and pieces, right? I mean,
Mm.
I like that comment, but at the same time, it's one of those things where if in my experience, to love someone no matter what they're like in terms of how they are or how they are towards me is I don't know. I have some limitations around that, but yeah,
Sure, we all do. Like we could, it's not to say stay with them,
yeah,
it's just to say the real love is you love them as they are.
yeah, I agree
It's
with
not
that.
like we don't need to have to be in a fellowship or on a journey together,
Mm,
but I can still love you the way that you are.
yeah. Were you close to
Like
your dad?
sorry?
Were you close to your dad?
No, we had a pretty on and off relationship for a long time, and it was up and down. He
Mm,
had some severe trauma growing up, a lot of health issues as well. But I didn't respect him a lot because I was using what he'd done in the past rather than who he was as a way to hold on to resentment towards him.
yeah,
And I
right.
blamed him for a lot of stuff for a long time. And our last interaction was actually him arguing with me. I didn't write back, I didn't engage in it. And because some stuff happened on Christmas Day, and I took Luna to Christmas Day, and my family just acted atrociously. Everyone was drunk and just abusing each other. And I was like, I'm out. This is unacceptable, because I saw it through the eyes of a father, a husband, and a partner and a son. And it just wasn't good. But this was my family of origin. And so it showed me how far I'd come since I'd been in that, because our whole family hadn't been together for a long time. And that created a rupture. And during that rupture, he died. And so one of the things with that, people are like, oh, do you regret it? Do you, and I said, no, because I stood for what was right at the time. So even though I loved him for who he was, I didn't love what he did. And there's
Sure.
a big difference between the two. Now moving through it, having gotten to the other side, I can see how much of a gift all of that was, because it showed me a lot about myself and who I was. That at the time, because we live in a society where everyone's feelings need to be honored and any behavior is just supposed to be allowed to, be done. And I'm not like that. And so his behavior in those last moments was an opportunity for me to stand in my own integrity for what I value. And it doesn't matter if we had a fight for 2 months. He was in my life for 40 years. I'm not going to define our last moments together by that. I'll define my relationship with him of how much of a great dad he was
Whole
when I
time.
was growing up,
Yeah.
because he was a great dad. He was a really good dad. And I got a lot of good attributes from him that I didn't see until after his passing. So now I acknowledge him in my own way, which is really the relationship with myself anyway, that he was the reflection of.
That's
So he was a good man, very stoic, very Aurelius type head of the family, very traditional. And yeah, he was awesome.
mm. Are there parts of your dad that that show up within you that you love and hate?
I wouldn't say there are no parts of myself that I really hate anymore. There are parts of me that I find challenging, right? Which, aggression is one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can be very aggressive. I can switch that on. I like to dominate. I like to, and not women or children, obviously, but like I like to usually be the smartest guy in the room. That plays on the ego a bit as well. I like to be aggressive. I like to outdo other people. I like to be number one.
Is that an attribute of your dad though? Is that something that you
yeah,
would
yeah,
take away from him?
yeah, 100%. And his stoic, like Aurelius type approach to, he never wanted my mum to work, and I always thought that was selfish. But I'm the same. Like if, in my relationship, I don't want my woman to work. I want to take care of her. I'm the provider. That's what I want. So she can be a mother and look after the children. That's what I want in a woman, and I'm okay with wanting that. It doesn't make me a misogynist or anything like that. The women, like, it's like the man provides the house, the woman provides the home. That's
Sure.
just a natural consequence of things. And so I got that from him as well. Like he was always driven to success. He was still working while he was in hospital about to die.
Hmm.
He's still going. And that's what I'm like. I work pretty much under any circumstances. So I got a lot of great attributes from him, and a lot of the challenging ones as well came from him as well. Like I like making money. He loved to make money as well. Some people would say, it's interesting, the money is the root of all evil. That's not actually true. It says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And it's been put into the love of money is the root of all evil, which it's not. Money can be used for evil or for good. I look after a number of people. I pay multiple rents for people as well. My success that I got from my dad is my ability to be able to provide for other people. So there's a lot of good things in there as well. And there were some challenging things too in there. So yeah, it's been an interesting way to look at it. I'm very much my father's son.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Do you think that what you've been through recently is just an evolution at this point in time? Like it's a lesson that you've learned in this moment that perhaps if you reflect on years gone by, you would have gone through. I know I've heard your story in the past. You've told me about being in that sort of corporate scene and earning tons of money, and it's sort of like the fast life, fast women, fast cars, and all the rest of it that goes with it. So there are features and attributes or character traits of your dad that would have shone through at that point that were used in a sense for a negative reason, or what you would deem now as something that you were using to manipulate or to take advantage of, and you were using it for, I won't say nefarious reasons, but you know where I'm going with that. And I think now at your age at this point, and particularly going through this sort of catalyst to understanding a new level, like that's what I find fascinating about relationships and about the past and about history and about memories that are attached to emotions, that are attached to thoughts and feelings, and where they sort of sit on that timeline of events. And I find that, like, tomorrow I could go through something that could be emotive or could be emotional to a degree that helps me learn a lesson from something that happens, or a memory that happens 10 or 15 years ago. Does that make sense? The way I'm explaining it?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Do you find that at this level of or stage of your life, you're interpreting the death of your father in a way that, look, you could have another event happen in, like, I know when I was a dad, right? I spoke to this story the other day. So I had this running joke with the obstetrician, and at that time I was watching a couple of movies, and it was one that was with Leonardo DiCaprio, and he has this moment where he's a doctor, or pretending to be a doctor, and he says to the other doctors around, "Do you concur?" And they go, "What?" And they're confused, and he goes, "Do you concur?" And they go, "Yes, I concur." And he's just fumbling his way. He's trying to pretend that he's a doctor in that scenario. So anyway, I'm having a moment with the doctor about that movie, and my wife is in labor, and we're going through this sort of process. And I said, "Look, I would deliver the baby if I could." And he said, "Do you want to do that?" And I said, I would love to." So next minute, I've got the gloves on, I've got everything going on, and my boy's coming through, and I'm the one that is holding him and pulling him through, and I'm the one that cut the cord and all that kind of stuff. And when I think about it, I can feel myself well up when I think about it, when I think of that moment. And so the reason why I tell you that story is because, like, when they handed Sebastian to me, I was a blubbering mess. I was just like, "Oh my fucking God, this kid, this miracle that I helped deliver," was just like, that's a moment for me with all of my 3 kids that I've had, and never be taken away. But that bond and that moment that I cherish. But the reason why I tell you that story is because it was a catalyst to thinking and feeling a certain way in that moment, where I may have judged my dad, or like you said, held him to a certain level in my mind based on his decisions and the things that he's done, negative or positive, mostly negative, at that time. But then realized in that moment the magnitude of what it's like to have another human life that you're in charge of, and that you're speaking for, and you've got to provide for. And so throughout my life, now my kids are nearly 17, 13 and 11, like, you go through stages. So I mean, in a long-winded way, I'm kind of trying to extract from you, are there moments throughout your life where you now have a new interpretation of what happened in the past to make sense of the present?
Yeah 100%. And so the way that I look at things, and it's a really good example of that, we're talking about death and birth, so it's quite a good contrast to look between what we're both talking about. I've just gone through a death, which was the precursor to the birth of really, like, who I'm now becoming. And you went through a death of you at the time of the birth of your children, which created a new Adrian, so they're inherently linked, birth and death, right? And so what I get to at this point now is I really realize the preciousness and transience of life, where it's like, this is just something I'm going through now. It's not going to be like this forever. This isn't going to be the way it's always going to be. And, you know, at some point we'll check out of all this and that's going to be it. And so it might be like, you know, if I'm in a relationship and that ends, it'll be like, you know, I'm really grateful for that experience that I went through. And rather than look at it with bitterness or blame or anger, rather I see the beauty in it much more quickly now. And, you know, in the death of my father, like what a beautiful experience for me to understand that grief is the cost of admission to love, right? Because you can't love without grief. That's the thing. And so being prepared for both, the grieving I went through was rather an honoring of who he was, because I did really love him. That's the thing. And I may not have been as loving as I would have liked to be towards him, but that's okay. That taught me the lesson that I needed to in order to become more loving. And that was the necessary catalyst for that. And whenever I see him again, I'll see him again. You know, I don't think this is it. And so there's a comfort in that for me as well. And if I don't, then, well, I'm probably not going to care anyway. But there's, you know, there's this way that I look at things now, which is like, it's kind of like the beauty and the sort of tragedy of being a human is that we all get over stuff at some point. You know, the amount of times I've heard someone say, I'll never get over them, blah, 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 blah. It's like, you will in a year or 2 years, maybe at worst. You'll come back and go, fuck, what was I thinking being with that person? You know, like, what was I thinking? Like, we've all been there. And my exes would probably say the same about me. Guaranteed they would, actually. I know for a fact that they would. And so it's like, you know, that's what happens. We get over things. We have people, I've worked with people that have lost children, you know, which is probably the greatest tragedy a human being can face. And fortunately, I've never had to experience that. And it's like, but they will get over it at some point. It doesn't mean the love goes with that. They get over the grief of it. And they get to honor that person, the love that was revealed within them, which you had at the time of the birth. That baby was showing you how much love is within you. They didn't put it there. They didn't open up the top of your head and go, all right, Adrian, there you go, mate. Day one, right, here you go. It just revealed the capacity for you to love, you know, and that's really the gift of it all. So I guess in a long-winded way, it's to say that, yeah, all the stuff that I've been through has made me much more capable of dealing with very difficult things, and concurrently with that, looking at seeing the beauty of being able to go through a difficult process. It's like we look back and say, that was really difficult, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And so now I get more of like almost like a sense of excitement when something difficult happens, because I know I'm going to unlock parts of myself that I haven't seen yet. And that just makes me more capable.
And do you think that someone who has the ability to move through sticky points or tough times in life has just been through more tough times to know how to get through sticky points? Is that the basics of it, really? Like when you're talking to someone who for the first time is going through a very traumatic experience, well, then their world's crashing down. But perhaps you and I, having had experiences that have really tested your resolve in things, you're like, well, fuck, this is like a 4 out of 10 for me, you know, because I'm always experiencing life lessons as an 11 out of 10.
Yeah. And so I was talking to a mate of mine the other day, and when we were talking about that, I'm like, you never really heal, right? This whole thing about, I've got to heal and become whole, and then you get over your childhood, and then all of a sudden you got to go through like all your ancestral lineage or some bullshit like that. It's like, just what you want. It's not about healing, because life will throw things at you right up until the minute you're about to die. And that's the greatest test, is how do you face infinity unflinching? How are you going to face that, right? But you're not going to go through this period. It's unlikely where, unless you live somewhere in isolation in the bush and you somehow get your connection, your life, and all of that somehow sorted, we're going to lose people. We're going to have breakups. Relationships are going to end. We're going to experience joy, love, peace, vitality. We're going to lose, you know, getting into our 40s. It's like you start to slow down a bit. You're not as fast as you used to be, you know, like things start to change a little bit. So it's like, then you're dealing with that. The body changes. We get older. And so it's like, life is going to keep throwing things at me. How am I going to be able to move through all of those as they come along? So I don't pray to be healed and have an easy life. And this isn't my saying. I can't remember who said it. Pray for shoulders strong enough to carry big burdens so they don't really affect you. And that goes back to stoicism, which is having capacity and resilience, where it's like, I like the excitement of life. I like the chaos, the drama. You know, I got a new dog who's sitting next to me. I've had him for 8 months now. I love that dog to pieces. Love him to pieces. And I'm like, This is going to be hard whenever I have to say goodbye to him because we've got such a strong bond and he's such a sweetheart and a beautiful dog. But that's the beauty of what I get with him. I get the beauty of like hopefully 10 or 15 years with him.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'll be upset and like maybe it'll take a couple of years to get past it. But that's a small price to pay for the joy that he brings into my life every day. Same with relationships, same with children whenever I have them, which I hope to soon. You know, it's like that's the whole part of what we get to do in this game. And the good always outweighs the bad. The bad isn't, there's not a whole lot of bad that happens in our lives. It's just that we magnify it and hold on to it for a long time because that's what the ego wants. So we keep replaying the story in our head, even if it's not there anymore. So death is the final frontier. That's the biggest challenge we're ever going to face is death. So life is going to keep preparing us for those deaths up until we reach death. And then whatever happens after that, well, I guess we'll find out.
Do you think within your experience, because you've gone through a bunch of like key moments in life, would you agree? Like in terms of, because you've been to jail and like there's been a bunch of stuff going on. Is that right? I don't think I've heard your full story or you've ever told it to me on a podcast, but I feel like people like yourself that have been through situations like that, there's sort of, do you find any comfort in thinking that there's a higher purpose or a higher calling, or the reason why you have to step up the way that you do is as a result of these tougher times? Whereas there's some people that just cruise through life. Like I've got mates of mine that have they've had a pretty easy childhood. Nothing's really ever gone wrong. You know, like they haven't really lost any loved ones, and nothing's really bad. Nothing bad has really happened. They're just like, I've got nothing to really, be regretful for or anything like that. Whereas I'm thinking, have you ever seen that meme? Was like, I've learned enough fucking lessons. Like I don't need another lesson. I know the whole book on lessons, right? So like what do you think in terms of that? Do you just roll with how life is going for you, or do you feel like there is some sense of a higher purpose? There's some sense of a higher calling, or there's another version of you in another point in time which is saying you need to come to this level?
I think, I don't know if it's predefined coming into this life, but really what I see in it is like, how quickly can we develop a relationship with God? And so for me, I might have chosen for myself a much more difficult path, because the difficulty in what I went through growing up in the environment that I did, which was very psychologically and emotionally abusive and sometimes physically. And so going through that, and then going to jail was not like, necessarily this big bad thing. It was just a natural progression. That's all it was. It was just like, if someone's got a dad and his brothers are all plumbers, he's probably going to be a plumber. My dad was in prison as well. So it's like, it was just the natural order of things. It's like, it's not really this bad situation. It taught me a lot when I went in there, but everything that's happened to me has allowed me to do the work I do now. They're inherently tied in together. I wouldn't be able to do this if I didn't go through that. So the first 34 years of my life was marked with chaos, addiction, anger, aggression, probably 30. Actually, I started to come out of it about 30. And then I'm 40 now. And like, the last 6-7 years have been unwinding some stuff, but the amount that I've achieved in 6 years versus absolute chaos for 34, those 34 were worth it, because the satisfaction I get from life now, it's so deep. And so I've sought out intense scenarios, which makes me aptly qualified to be able to help people move through what they've gone through. I don't really want an easy life. I like intensity. I like intense experiences. I like doing hard things. I like, looking at myself in the mirror and being like, you're a fucking little bitch. Like, go do the things that you said you were going to do. I like that. I guess I can't sit there and say that I think that it's just all for nothing, because there's a divinity in this. There is. My heart tells me that. My soul tells me that. Otherwise, what's the point? Like, what would be the point of this? This is just creation out of nothing. That doesn't seem right to me, right? Someone asked me in one of my mentorships, they said, how do you know there's a creator? I said, because we can create. It's pretty simple. Like, we live in a world of rules. Rules have to be created, which means there has been some higher power that's created this, because we can create in it. We didn't give ourselves the right to create. There's a divine intelligence. You look at cells, they split to go seek other cells to create. There's a
communicate.
magic in it. Otherwise, yeah, even communicate, and like everything in this place is a system that's run by rules and laws, which means it was created. So a creator must have created it. So it kind of answers the question for me without getting too existential or philosophical about it, you know?
I think that's a
So
really good point to bring
I
up,
do
though.
think there's a higher power.
Yeah, sure. So can you
Go on.
define for me like what the higher power is to you? Like you mentioned before that there's an attack on masculinity, there's attack on the family, there's attack on the church. And then a minute ago you mentioned that we have this I guess a desire or at least an intention to be closer to God. And one of the things that I've noticed in this last couple of years, it just seems to be something that's caught my attention, particularly in the last probably 12 months, is this progression towards people turning to God, turning to Jesus, reading the Bible again, quoting scriptures, revelations, all this kind of stuff, because it seems like that there's a timeline that has been lived in the past that we're now living through, it seems to be again. So, I mean, that's my interpretation of that particular portion of particularly the Bible and the scriptures, is that the only way that you can write about the future is to have lived it at some point. So I just feel like perhaps there's a tie in that way. But I'd like to hear from you in terms of what's your interpretation of God?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So and I don't know if I could give you a clear answer on it, because it's more of like a deep knowing with it all. And so to say that this is it would be ignorant, but I've seen that a lot in the world, around people moving back to Christianity, people reading the Bible. I'm reading the Bible at the moment, actually. And a couple of people have ridiculed me for it. I'm like, I've read every other book that's important. The New Testament is the most important book that's ever been written. And so why wouldn't I read that? That's ignorant of me not to read it. And so I look at it from this point, and I've sort of analyzed, I'm studying the teachings of Christ at the moment, and looking at, there's more evidence for him being on earth than any other person ever in history. Like you look at Aristotle and Plato, there's only 10 eyewitness accounts of them being around, 10. There's more than 5,000 eyewitness accounts for Jesus being alive. So it's like, he was real. He was on this planet. Now, there's the teachings of Christ, and then there's the human interpretation from a religious aspect, which can often get swayed and, corrupted, which we see in Catholic Church and whatever. Sure. But if we look at it from a point of what evil is in the world, right? If people think Christ wasn't real or Christianity isn't real or whatever, why are there all these Satanists that are worshiping Satan everywhere? Like, you can see it everywhere. That's not me interpreting something. Like, you look at the Grammys and Sam Smith, that was a satanic ritual. Okay. It's there. It's right in front of us. So if that exists, then there's the opposite that has to exist as well. So there's a lot of evil that's being exposed on the planet now. And so to move towards the idea of God, which I guess would be the ultimate form of love and acceptance in its form from purity, because I just think evil is the absence of God. Evil is the belief that they are God. That's the goddess stuff. And, like you look at the goddess culture, that stuff's so dark in the new age. It's super dark, right? And I was part of all of that for a long time. And so I know now, getting out of it, looking at it, going, wow, that was really dark. Not a fan of it. And so people are moving back towards it because the evil is being exposed, which is the antithesis to God. So people that are of that volition are going to swan dive right into it, into the evil, into the darkness, into the new age stuff, into the highly sexual practices, like the immoral stuff. Like you look at the Freemasons, they have the chessboard. The chessboard, or the black and white checkers, is light and dark. They're the same. They're one and the same, which we see in the new age. Men are masculine and feminine. Women are masculine and feminine. It's moral relativism. So it means there's no sin. Everyone can just do whatever they want and it doesn't matter. Whereas people moving back to God, I see as more having a sense of moral, a sense of virtue, a sense of developing strong character as well, and doing the right thing. And I know, looking at either, I know which side I'm on, and it's definitely not the evil side. I speak out against it. And so if we're looking at it from that perspective, then I think God is going to lead you to want to treat people well. God is going to make you want to forgive people and let go of trespasses, as it says in the Lord's Prayer, and to want to study and live a life that's closer to what we might interpret as God. And look, I might be wrong about all of it. I don't know. Maybe nothing happens after this. Maybe this is a simulation. Maybe we're on the back of a turtle. Don't know. Doesn't really matter. But I know what makes me want to live a good life, and it's moving towards having a relationship with God through prayer, through sacrifice, through being a man and being the best representation of who I can be, and help other men relearn that aspect of who they are naturally, the way God intended. And so that's the way I look at it. I don't think it's this guy in the clouds with a big white beard or anything like that. I think that's an anthropomorphic way to look at it, but it's more about, I'm going to honor the way in which I was made and what makes me feel good, and letting go through humility, through forgiveness. And the teachings of Jesus are quite profound if you look at them. There's a lot of very powerful stories in it. Mm-hmm. And one I was looking at, which was the parable of the, I think it was the unforgiving servant. And I won't go too far into it, but basically a master had a servant, and the servant owed him a lot of money. And the master was going to put him and his wife and children into slavery because that was the way to pay off the debt. The servant fell to his knees and begged him and said, please don't, I'll do anything to repay it. And he goes, the debt's paid, I forgive you. And then another servant owed the servant money, but it was like a tiny amount relative to what he owed the master. And so he started to choke out the servant that owed him money and said, no, you've got to pay me otherwise. And then he threw him in prison. And so then the master heard about it and threw him in prison as a result of it. So he wasn't doing to others what was done to him, sure. Right? And I feel like that's part of the energy of living a life that with a relationship with God is forgiveness. And forgiveness is a really important thing. And we could go down the path of allowance and victim blaming and all that sort of stuff, and racism and stuff like that, which is used heavily to not forgive people. But forgiving doesn't help the person you're forgiving, it helps you. Right. And I think that's one of the ultimate forms of mercy towards someone, is to let them have their experience on some level, but you letting it go. And then if you let it go, you become more peaceful, you're more loving. And I would say that puts you closer to God than anything else.
I like that answer. I think that's what I come from a religious background. And I used to love the parables and the biblical stories. I really did. The unfortunate side of it is going through a Catholic primary school and a Catholic high school was that the indoctrination of the man in the sky that's always watching you and beg for forgiveness and all those sorts of things and repent your sins, and you're already unworthy, unholy, and lesser than. You're an inferior being towards this higher power. So yeah. That to me definitely lost a lot of my credibility, or a lot of its credibility growing up. And unfortunately for me, Jag, I went through an era in my school where our head principal was a pedophile and killed himself. So we've gone through that, and that kind of put a bad taste in my mouth in terms of the religious doctrine that comes through. But I do like what you're saying in essence, which is embodying that godlike moral and the ethics of it, and embodying the belief systems of that, and carrying that through in how you live your life, being congruent with how you think, feel, and act, and the way that you portray yourself and the way that you give yourself to others. So I think that in essence is godlike, is Christ-like. And I think the more people that would embody and be congruent with that, because how many people do we know that on a social level, for example, project themselves as one persona, but then when you see them in another light, they're completely different.
Yeah, all the time.
So I mean, they're just incongruent, and that's probably something that I find the most. I have the least level of respect for people that don't embody that, and I find I have the most respect, even for people that I don't necessarily like, but I know that they are embodying their own truth in the way that they live and act throughout society. And I feel like that is more honorable than being someone who's just flashy and says all the right things, but then behind the scenes is an absolute arsehole to his kids or to his wife, or is it just a shrewd business person who rips people off and all those sorts of things. So I really like that side of things.
I agree with you on that, mate, as well. Just to touch on that, it's like, one of the things that I get from people I work with, they're like, I love how you just tell your stories and you're honest about it. I could sit here and present and go, oh, yeah, I grew up in a tough background and whatever. It's like, no, I've been in jail. I've ripped people off. I've bashed the shit out of other people. I've taken drugs. I've never cheated though. That's the one thing that I've never done is I've never cheated. I've never cheated in a relationship. And with all the other bad shit I did, right? I can sit there and say, at least I can hold myself to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I guess the reason with that was because I never needed to, it's like if I was single, I was single. And if I was in a relationship, I was in a relationship for a reason. I never vibed with that. But, I've done a lot of quote unquote bad stuff. And the way that I repent for that in a way is now by helping people. I had a guy message me the other day that I've only spoken to on Instagram a couple of times. And he's in a real bad space, really bad space. And he's like, I can't afford you and I just need some help. I'm like, I'll work with you. It's cool. Don't worry about it. So all the stuff that I've done, now I get to give back to the world, but I own my story. It's not something like, our mutual friend, Luke, like he's written books about his stories, and that's a way to own it. I'm not pretending that I'm perfect. I have my moments, I've had difficulty in my relationship. I talk about my father saying like the last exchange we had, it was an argument. If I was this perfect guy, I'd be like, no, it was really honorable and I honored him as a father. It's like, no, I didn't at all. And that's part of being human. And I'm okay with that, because the minute that you're okay with who you are, if someone isn't okay with you, it's just like, whatever. It's all good. It moves off you. And so I think, and some people sit there, and I talk about this as well, where people are like, they come at me about stuff and I'm like, I could take an easier path, but it wouldn't be integrous to who I am. I could write about love and the mind and provide really powerful insights to people and be all love and light and all that. Instead, I'm going after like the movements that are destroying our society, which that's no small task. I don't like copping abuse online all the time. People telling me to kill myself. I might take a much easier road and be like, oh, it's all love and light and this and that and love one another and all that. But I don't. I don't. I take the path that is in line with who I am, because if I'm not, I'd be compromising myself. And then if I compromise myself, I'm lying to myself, and I can't do that. I just can't do it. And I think that's important to live that way.
I love that about you. I think for me, it resonates a lot, because I liken that to my marriage. So, like when we went through our separation and divorce, that was a conversation I had with myself to say, I've hidden a lot about myself and a lot about the things that I truly think and feel, and some of the things that I haven't owned in the past. And I've hidden that away for fear and shame and guilt and, being judged and all those sorts of things. So in my do-over opportunity that I have to rewrite my story, is that I'm going to own all of those things, and I'm just going to be open and vulnerable, and in the face of judgment and ridicule and blame and all those sorts of things, I'm still going to go ahead and just be authentically me, because that's how I want to carry myself going forward. It's been frightening, but also so liberating. So like at the same time, I felt layers of myself shed as a result of being so open. And in a relationship dynamic, it's very interesting, because you are with someone who is not used to having such open and honest communication, and it's almost frightening to a large degree. It's very scary. It's very intimidating to have very frank and very forthright and very open and very vulnerable communications, and having to deal with sticking points. And to me, like, my green flag is the ability to move through sticking points without wanting to kill each other, and without wanting to hurt each other, or without having the need to put someone else down as a result of feeling a certain way or thinking or interpreting a certain situation. So the outgrowth of all of that is liberation and freedom. That's to me true spiritual growth, and what you were saying before, healing would be. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Like when you heal, you forget, right? What's the quickest way to feeling good? Tell the truth. That's what I always say. Like, tell the truth. And if you can't tell the truth, don't lie. And if you don't like lying, don't do shit you have to lie about. It's really not so hard. It's a pretty simple thing. And so when you own it, it's kind of like by your owning it, it's kind of like your own sort of repenting. You own that you did it. And it's almost like a way where you're forgiving yourself for what you did because you're willing to share it, which is, it's really powerful. It's a very, very powerful mechanism to take on.
100%. But in wrapping up, I wanted to find out from you, what do you hope to gain, or what is your ultimate outcome and goal for now that you're moving into the couple space and you're working within that dynamic? Where do you see like the problems are? What is some of the things that you feel are missing in relationships, or people are misinterpreting, or wanting to seek the truth or get to the bottom of? I feel like a lot of people are at a precipice in their life, particularly with relationships, and particularly at our age. So you're what, 40, I'm 45. Mm-hmm. And so you get to a point where you're like, you know what, I want to just figure this out, and I want to, work through it to a point where I can move forward. What are you seeing, and what do you hope to achieve with your new training?
Yeah, I really want to help to restore the commitment in relationships. I want to restore it from a spiritual foundation through a connection to God, to have children, to have a marriage where that's honored and people stick it out. There's a reason why in the last 50 years, divorce has skyrocketed, because of the feminist movement. Feminist movement like split the family up, which you did a great job of doing. So kudos to the people that engineered it. And now it's like this instant gratification factor. See it everywhere. It's like, oh, no, I'm over it. I'll just jump on Tinder, right? Or Bumble, or whatever those apps are. And it's like, it's at your fingertips. I'll go on Instagram. I'll do this. It's like, or I'll watch porn or something like that. Like bringing back the commitment through love rather than looking for ways out based on childhood trauma, and then labeling ourselves as like, I'm working with people in couples at the moment where it's like, she's got ADHD brain. He's got this, that. I'm like, just drop all that shit. Just drop all of it. It's like, do you love each other? Yes. Learn how to communicate and understand each other. Women want love, men want respect. It's a pretty simple language to understand. Tell the truth and don't lie. Be honest with each other, and honor your partners outside of that when they're not around. You do those simple things, your relationship will start to change. If you seek to understand and also want to be understood by being honest, you're going to have a very different relationship. The difficult part is there's these subconscious programs that are in the way of it, that get in the way, right? And then it's like, okay, we want to reach an expansion point. Relationships go through romantic love, then a power struggle, then move into real love. Power struggles can last 10 years. But if you look at it, it's because the man's saying one thing, the woman's not feeling loved, the man's not feeling respected. All men want is to be acknowledged for their contribution. And just women want to be loved and understood and held when they're going through difficult times, and to be touched or, held, whatever they want. That's up to them to be able to understand it. You get these two things right, it's very simple. Like I remember a time with my partner where this happened all within about 20 minutes of each other. And she's like, she stayed over and she said, oh, she's like, I'm wearing the same clothes as yesterday. And I said, oh, do you want to go home and get a change of clothes? And she goes, it would have been nice if you just said, I look beautiful anyway. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. And like 15 minutes later, there was something where I gave her some money, right? And I said, because she ordered something and I gave her the money back for it because she got ripped off. It was only like $100. And I said, just keep the $100. If you want to go to Brisbane and get yourself some books from the library up there, go do that. And she goes, oh, well, I couldn't get there. You really think $100 is going to get me there? I'm like, you know what would have been nice? If you just said, hey, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I really value that you gave me that money. So it was really simple like that. But it was so evident. Like she was like, oh, I'm not going to get there for that. I'm like, how about just say thank you? Order the books online, whatever it is. That's me contributing to you. Acknowledge my contribution. And me saying, I just moved into fix it mode, right? Which was, okay, if you want clothes, we'll just drive home. Super logical, right? But what she was saying was, I don't feel very good because I'm wearing the same clothes. Tell me that I'm beautiful. That if you get that right, mate, it's easy. It's easy. And so that's really what I want to bring back is the love and respect attribute that starts to come on the other side of the dissolution of the childhood trauma and the subconscious programming and the wounding. Get that out of the way and start to develop godly relationships, moving relationships towards a relationship with God in the container of the man and the masculine and the feminine and the woman, and just work with that, because I know that it works. You know, I've worked with many people and helped their relationships, and I want to keep doing it because society's gone after men and gone after relationships. And so that's what I want to bring back.
Yeah, I love it. I think you're going to hold the record now for probably the longest podcast, I would say, for this show. So
Wait,
if you don't mind holding that
number
title.
one everywhere.
Awesome. Yeah, number
Cool.
one in multiple categories. That'd suit you so well. So, mate, it's always a pleasure talking to you. I really value you as a human being. I hope one day we can catch up in the flesh and enjoy some conversations like this outside of a podcast would be really good. But I admire you, I honor your work, and I think you're doing a great job. And I really want to thank you for joining me again on the Conversations with Adrian podcast.
Yeah, thanks, man. That, you know, I really appreciate that and respect you as well. Otherwise, I wouldn't keep doing the podcast with you. But you know, you lead a great podcast, and I really respect what you're doing in the world too, man. So, you know, much respect for you, man. And I'll always be happy to come on here and have a chat with you, bro.
Legend. Thank you so much. All right, mate.
Awesome, brother. Thanks, man.
Talk to you soon.
All right, mate. See you later.
Bye now.